You there, have you ever been playing an RPG and decided this is way too difficult? Well, you're not the only one, champ. I introduced to you Good Game. Good Game is not bad because it has fair difficulty. Where's this joke even going? What am I doing? So I've been on a strategy game binge recently, and I've had some time to think about some of the things that turns people away from the genre as a whole. One of the games I tried was Mordheim City of the Damned. Sounds like a grand time, I know. And while I did legitimately have some fun while playing it, it is so excruciatingly unfair and difficult to the point where it is simply unplayable. And this is coming from a person who enjoys Dark Souls and thinks it is fair. Even a warband that is well leveled and funded can all be ruined by 1 or 2 losses. And because the game auto-saves after every move you make, you are practically forced to restart the game. There's no easier difficulty in any way, shape, or form. At all. Hope you like the difficulty that the game gives you, because you're stuck with it. I want to be able to like this game because some of its mechanics are really interesting, but it's so frustrating that I don't know how anyone can enjoy it. I might go back to it at some point, but right now, I can't recommend it to anybody. I just can't. This isn't a rarity among strategy games either, especially ones with roots to older games. XCOM is known for this, but at least there you're allowed to reload saves when you want to. I recently tried one of the older Baldur's Gate games, but there's no tutorial and it doesn't teach you anything about the controls, so I was just left flailing helplessly, not knowing what I was doing, where I'm supposed to go, what's happening. This has been getting somewhat better in recent years, with games like Divinity Original Sin having a much lower learning curve. But that game is also pretty unfair at times, with insta-kill traps in sometimes random places, and at one point expecting you to stealth past invincible enemies, which before this point in the game wasn't all that helpful of a skill, so you might not have invested in stealth, and the game also limits your ability to flee at the same time, so if you get caught, it means you're reloading your save, buddy. So many great games feel the need to do this, and it cripples the entire experience. Oh, you aren't hardcore. You're a casual gamer. Oh, well, sorry for wanting to have fun with the game and not be stuck at the same part for 7 years because it's too difficult for me. I want to have fun with the game, so why do you insist on making games that make it too difficult to have fun with? From my experience, this problem isn't as prominent in party-based RPGs like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, but there are still some noticeable issues. Compare games like Mario & Luigi or Paper Mario to something like Final Fantasy that's a bit more complicated. For Mario RPGs, there are essentially 2 types of attacks and that's it, and it is instantly apparent, almost always from their design, if not in actual combat, if one is more effective than the other. For more complicated RPGs, though, there are physical attacks and magical attacks, and some RPGs separate magical attacks by elements like fire and ice, and the only way to tell what is more effective for sure is to test it and compare the damage, but now you've wasted a few turns trying to figure out what's better to use. Now your whole party's at half health and you need to heal, but you could also use a defensive buff. But how long does it last, and how good is it, and how does it work, and and it moves us all. The point is that in more complex RPGs, there's a lot of information hidden from the player. And while some might prefer this kind of play, where they need to probe the enemy for weaknesses and test the capabilities of their skills and powers, this can lead to a lot of trial and error, which ends up forcing you to spend the first 5 or more turns of a boss fight trying to figure out what kind of attack they're vulnerable to. And even then, there are so many numbers going on at once that you can't see, that even when you think you have it figured out, there's a level of uncertainty that is very, very difficult to get rid of. Most of the time, this isn't a noticeable issue during gameplay. This is true. But if you ever find out afterwards that you weren't exploiting a weakness that you easily could have, if you had known it existed, it feels super awful and you just wish you could have known that. Turn-based RPGs have long had this issue, but I'll admit I haven't noticed it as much as I make it out to seem before playing a certain game. Now this is the part where I finally talk about the game I want to talk about, the Epic Battle Fantasy series. But most of this will be about the most recent edition, EBF 5. I'm just going to call it EBF for short because it's a million times more convenient. Starting at the third game, I think, they added the scan feature. This allows you to use a single character's turn to scan all of the enemies currently on the field, which permanently reveals their defensive stats as well as their elemental and status resistances, and sometimes a brief insight to their tactics. And regardless of whether or not they're scanned, all allies and enemies always have their current statuses, buffs, and debuffs displayed. This means that all of the information that in other games is uncertain and awkward to figure out is right in front of you. You now have all the information you need to make your decisions. The difficulty is no longer from trying to figure out what they're weak to, but instead using the information you're given to make the best possible decision. It's like if someone told you to solve a puzzle. You want to start with all the pieces, right? With these games, you start with all the pieces at hand, like you'd want. But what a lot of other games do is they walk up to you and they're like, hey, listen, buddy, pal, I know you want to finish this puzzle, and I know I want you to solve this puzzle, but I hid the pieces around the house, and before you can solve the puzzle, you have to find the pieces first. It's an unnecessary step, and it feels out of place for the type of game that you're playing. But don't be fooled, this game can still be hard when it wants to be, especially when you're playing on harder epic difficulty. But when you lose, it rarely feels like you just weren't leveled up enough. It immediately feels like there was something you missed in your strategy. Something in your equipment or your skill choice probably could have been done better. Which brings me to my next point, the equipment system and how upgrades work. Each character has a different weapon type. Matt uses swords, Anna uses bows, Natalie uses staves, so on. And you get more throughout the game, as you'd expect. But unlike most games where you find blatantly superior versions of the previous weapons and throughout the old ones, each weapon instead uses a different element when attacking and gives you different resistances, stat upgrades, and extra features, such as sometimes casting a certain skill at the beginning of each turn for free, or powering up skills of a certain element. And as long as you're upgrading them equally, none of these weapons are blatantly more powerful than another. This means you need to consider enemies' weaknesses and resistances, which you can find out pretty easily thanks to the lovely scan feature, and choose what equipment might be best for your plan. And this isn't just for weapons either. Each character also uses armor and accessories that have similar effects and strategy to it. And when upgrading equipment on top of statistical boosts, it also gives more effects that can be used tactically, like regenerating health when you hit an enemy, or giving more resistances, etc., etc. Giving more than one special effect to consider when you're strategizing. A similar thing happens with skills as well. Skills can be upgraded with AP, which you get from winning battles, and you can use on whatever skills for each character you want. For example, upgrading a skill that used to only target one enemy can either target one enemy with a strong attack, or all enemies with a weaker attack. And if you really want to get into it, you can consider how your gear and skills interact with each other as well. So there's a lot of depth to it. You've probably also noticed by this point that in the bottom left corner there are the 3 present characters and 2 more in backup that show up sometimes. This is something that was introduced in EBF 4 with the introduction of Anna as the 4th party member. But even when she was introduced, there are still only 3 on the field at a time. So here's how that works. At any time, without spending a turn, you can switch a character who has not yet taken their turn, or someone who is down, with someone in backup. All of these characters have different specializations and abilities that make them different, as well as I've mentioned, different gear. I think this system could be explained a little better to make it more immediately appealing to new players, but your backup will automatically heal in between turns, so taking advantage of it does have tactical benefits. So why is this important? Because it's unique. When EBF 4 came out with Anna, it easily could have switched to a 4-person party system. And while in EBF4 it's not as refined of a mechanic as it is in 5, it's cool how they instead opted for a new mechanic that hasn't really been done before. And you know what? It works really well. And a lot of these things I've mentioned aren't typical parts of turn-based RPGs, but it still feels like a turn-based RPG. And all of these mechanics work together so well that not only do they enhance the kind of game it is, but it also makes it feel fresh. And I've mentioned a lot, I know, and this probably seems overwhelming, but really, in gameplay, it's not as bad as it might sound. If you want to ignore all this and play on an easy difficulty, you absolutely can with pretty much no penalty. But it's not really a task to try to remember all of this, because it's almost always right in front of you. Like how a lot of people, myself included, I'll admit, when they play Skyrim, completely forget to use their shout ability. It's almost entirely because there's no immediate visual indicator that says, hey, remember you have this ability? It's pretty cool. We worked hard on it. Are you gonna use it? No? Oh, I see. The only thing close to that is the cooldown bar at the top that only appears after you use it and is combined with the compass. So most of the time you only remember that as the compass, because that's what you really use it for. Whereas in EBF, out of battle, you can see that you can upgrade skills and equipment and use stat boosting items. And in battle, you can see you have people in backup and you can see your equipment and switch it, and you can use your summons. And I still haven't talked about summons or the fact that skills have cooldowns instead of using MP like most games, but whatever, I'm not gonna go over it because this is already a long video. So finally, let's wrap this up. What can we learn from this analysis? Well, first, don't feel like you need to hide information from the player. Sometimes hiding stuff can make things interesting, and you don't necessarily have to make a huge deal letting them know that water spells are good against fire elementals, because your players do have basic intelligence whether or not you believe it, but other times it can be quite annoying if you don't really know what you're doing is even remotely correct. Yet at the same time, if you're being forthright with an enemy's weakness, make sure that it's still challenging regardless. Second, make new equipment and upgrades interesting. Let me know if this sounds familiar. You get a new weapon that has nothing special but does more damage than your current one, so you drop the one you have completely for this new one. And then you do it again, and again, and again, and again. Boring. Give me something that does the same amount of damage but increases defense, or gives me a chance to counterattack, or gives me a new skill. Divinity Original Sin did something like this with its equipment system, and it made finding equipment a cool part of the game. It's a million times more exciting. Finally, don't be afraid to throw a weird mechanic into the mix if you think it'll make things more interesting. If you decide in testing that it doesn't work out, then at least you didn't let the opportunity for something unique slip away untouched. If you can take something familiar and switch it into something a little bit different, it can make something really memorable, and something that's more than just another cookie-cutter experience. And I think that's what EBF does really well. Even though it might not look very unique at first glance, it has a lot of layers to it. And when you really dig deep into it, there's a lot to find. And when you start to really understand it, it feels pretty good. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
There we go. Oh. There we go. Sorry. Ooh, okay.